Welcome to Kapow Sports. Jerry White, Jeff Underwood, and a very special guest. We'll get to you in just a second. Again, we're on location today at the Overstreets.
The famous Overstreets.
Man, if you don't know, I don't if it's famous or infamous.
Infamous. Well,
either way.
If you ask them, Ken he's infamous.
He is
for
infamous.
Sure.
Hey, again, guys, thank you so much. The voice of the Auburn Tigers. We're blessed and honored to be able to get this interview. Andy Burcham, thank you so much.
Hey, Andy.
Guys, it's my pleasure. Glad to connect up. I love the setting that you have there. That's a nice setting to be working today. That's for sure.
Yes, it is. Only if we could fish a little bit. That would be great too. That would top it all off.
Indeed.
So I guess it's been a whirlwind for you, and for people, I'm gonna, I know this is a huge assumption, but we're gonna assume that some people don't know you that well.
That's quite all right.
They've been living under a rock, if that's the case. That's for sure.
They do that. I mean, you are Auburn, 31 years plus, I guess, and just tell us a little bit about what got you from Nashville, Illinois, if that's right, all the way down to Auburn.
Guys, I grew up in the St. Louis area and was always a huge Cardinals fan. And when the Cardinals won the World Series, and I'm going to give you my age here. When the Cardinals won the World Series in 1967, my father brought home the album of the highlights, which featured Harry Carey and Jack Buck. And I listened to that album. I was 6 years old, and I listened to that album backwards and forwards. And honest to goodness, I'm honest when I tell you, at that point, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my career. I wanted to be a broadcaster. And went to Indiana State, worked in Bloomington, Illinois, and Carbondale, Illinois. And then in 1988, I moved to Auburn. My first wife was getting her PhD in psychology at Auburn. And I was able to get on with a country radio station here, WKKR, which at the time was owned by the man that now is the mayor in Opelika, Gary Fuller. And they had an opening for their morning show and to do women's basketball for Auburn. And that's where it started for me. I had been in Auburn a total of 2 days when I started that job. And I've worked with Auburn sports every day since that time back in 1988. So I've lived in Lee County, Alabama longer than I've lived anywhere else in my life. And I'm blessed to have been associated with Auburn, and now this past year to work as the voice of the Auburn Tigers.
Dream come true. I'm sure. I'm blessed not to be at your level. I don't want to be at your level. Who wants that pressure? I love doing the play-by-play here locally at Etowah High School, obviously Cadillac Williams High School.
Yep.
And so very proud to do that. And it's a different feel. I mean, to be able to be the voice, and you just got the title. You've been the voice of Auburn athletics for a long time.
Yeah, it's a different time management was one of the biggest things that I had to adjust to in this job. And I was named the voice back in August, and then, went through my first season with football, men's basketball, and that, of course, ended at the SEC tournament. And I had worked with baseball for 25 years with Rod Bramblett, of course, until he passed away last May. So, yeah, I've been around Auburn for quite some time, but this is a big step for anybody to be in this role. And there's a lot of things that come with this, a lot of functions and responsibilities, but guys, it's what I've worked for my entire career. And I love it, but there is a responsibility because you're not only representing that Auburn team that you're calling, you're representing Auburn athletics, and to some degree you're representing Auburn University in what you're doing. And I take that job very, very seriously.
And if you wouldn't mind, tell us how the community has rallied around you and your family during this time, this transition, as far as stepping up to the Auburn football job.
Yeah, it was gratifying, Jeff, because I just, what happened to Rod and Paula is beyond tragic. And we had so many people step up, and you guys probably know the story that their son, Joshua, we're his guardians. And so Joshua lives with my wife Jan and I now. And so we had so many people step up and help us in that transition. Jan and I have never been parents until this past summer. So that was a huge transition. He was 15 at the time. He's turned 16 since then. So we're all learning this new dynamic in our life. And we've had so many people from churches and from Auburn University, from Lee County that have all stepped up and helped us. And then in August, the job became mine. And just so many people encouraging me as I moved into that role. And, it probably helped that I've been around here for 31 years and had been a part of the football crew since 1990 and women's basketball since 88 and baseball for the 25 years that I worked with Rod doing that. So I think that probably helped. And then I had done a local radio show for 12 years in Auburn as well, dealing with a lot of folks from Mayor Fuller now and Mayor Ham, now Mayor Anders in Auburn, and the presidents at Auburn University. So folks knew who I was for the most part. And I think that probably helped rather than someone coming into this area, into this job kind of cold turkey. I think it helped that it was someone that they were familiar with.
Not to mention that you're incredibly talented. That's for sure. And it is evident. So we're thankful that you have the job and that you are the voice of the Auburn University Tigers.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's very nice to hear that. That first football game, the Oregon game down in Dallas. I'd done a lot of those tape delay games way back when with Stan White and Cole Kublik, and then I hadn't done football in a while, and it took me about 2 quarters to kind of catch up to the speed of the game. You always hear about these guys that move as players to the next level, and they talk about it takes a while to catch up to the speed of the game. Well, it took a little while for me to catch up to the speed of the game as well. But then I became more comfortable with it. Basketball was probably much more comfortable because I'd done women's basketball. Listen, I know the speed of the game is a little bit different, but basketball is basketball. It's something I was familiar with. But that football, there was a little bit of breaking in, so to speak, and I look forward to the next game that we get to call, whenever that is.
Football, what a tremendous team! I mean, you have around you, not the football team, but the broadcast team. Incredible.
Yeah, and you know what? I've talked to a lot of folks about that, and that's one of the great things about this job for me is that although it was a new role for me as the play-by-play voice, I had worked with Stan White and Brad Law and Ronnie Brown and Jason Campbell and our engineer, Patrick Tisdale, and Gene Dulaney, who's our spotter, and Chris Davis, who's our general manager. I've worked with all these guys. It was just as the locker room host at the time. So I've been around them. Paul Ellen as well. Don't want to forget Paul because he's been part of the network crew as long as I have and a former play-by-play voice with Auburn as well. So I knew these guys. I was comfortable with these guys. And that was comforting for me, knowing that this was the crew that I was going to be working with. And although Sonny Smith and I had not worked together per se, I knew Sonny. I covered Sonny as the coach here. It didn't take us real long to kind of find our rhythm together. And then, although Brad Law and I did just a few games together in baseball, I've worked on and off with Brad for 15 years in the office. So that familiarity, I think, helped everyone. I know that it certainly helped me.
I want to go back just a little bit, if I can, Andy. I want to talk about the old baseball days. I love some of those calls. Give us some of your favorite moments calling Auburn baseball over the years.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is probably one of the it's one of the all-timers with regard to Auburn baseball and really for Auburn athletics, and that's the David Ross home run in 1997 against Florida State down in Tallahassee. And it's one of those. I mean, you're down to your last strike literally in a game, and remember, this was not the game that sent Auburn to Omaha, but it was a game that kept Auburn undefeated in that regional. And if Auburn won, whoever won that game, someone else would have to beat them twice on Sunday to eliminate them from the tournament. I was just talking with Hal Baird about this yesterday, a podcast with the legendary Auburn coach that will be out in a couple weeks on auburntigers.com. And that moment was so electric because David Ross swings and it looks like he misses, and Florida State's already coming out of the dugout. But as it turns out, it was a foul tip and the catcher drops the ball. Okay, there's still life. Hal tells the story that he turned to someone in the dugout and said something like, "Don't run me over when he hits this home run," and we all go out there. Now,
Wow.
I don't know that. That's the story he tells. And then I think 2 pitches later, or a pitch later, a hanging slider, and Ross hits it out, and it's a no-doubter. I mean, it's a no. I've got goosebumps thinking about it right now. And Rod and I went from trying to be professional broadcasters at that time to we both stood up and were hugging each other and still talking and screaming and laughing. I mean, you listen to the call, and it's not exactly how you would want to do a call like that from a broadcaster standpoint. But we were so happy for Auburn. We were so happy because we were one step closer to get to go to Omaha. And listen, you know what it's like. You want Etowah to win those games. You want to be able to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium or to Bryant-Denny Stadium and call a state championship. You know what that feeling is like. Well, that's what it was for Rod and I. So that's one of the great calls. The Creed Simpson home run, much in the same light, at home against Clemson in the NCAA Regional when Auburn was down to a final strike. And that game, Auburn wins that game. That's another one. There are so many. I mean, Rod and I did games for 25 years together. And as many moments as there were for Auburn baseball. One of the things that has really resonated with me since Rod's passing was the time that we just spent together, driving to Gainesville, Florida, or Baton Rouge, or Tuscaloosa, or Starkville, or Knoxville, or Nashville. It doesn't matter. Those times that you spent together in the car talking about life, talking about baseball, talking about families, memories that we had. Those are the things that I'll remember even more so than those great moments. And the moments that are to come for Auburn athletics. It was that time together with a friend and making that friend and being part of our lives together. Those are the things that I miss more than anything else, more than the games, is those times that we spent together.
I was blessed to be able to become friends with Rod. And, I say that, but the funny thing is, as you well know, everyone that's been around him felt like they were friends with Rod. He was that kind of guy. But I used to get pointers. Hey, how can I become a better broadcaster? What can I do? And one conversation I remember in particular, he quotes you. He says, you have to have a good team. It can never be just about the play-by-play guy, that you helped him become a great broadcaster.
Well, that was very kind of him to say, and it was the same way. You work and listen. It's the team that you're with. It's whether it's that team that you play ball with, or that team that you work with in an office, or that team that you broadcast with on a Friday night, or a Saturday, or a Tuesday, or whatever. It's that teamwork. And Rod and I worked together for 25 years, and you get to know the rhythm of the broadcaster. You know what they do. You know how they make calls. You know if they need a stat, if you can quickly give them a stat, and vice versa. And you know what at times will make them laugh. What's funny to them, that type of thing. But the teamwork part, and for a lot of us, we're not able to be with our teams yet. Many of us are working from home, and it's these kind of meetings or Zoom meetings that folks are having. That's the connection you have. And I really look forward to the time when we're all back in the office together and can do our work together. But teamwork is important in so many. Listen, a family teamwork is so important. So what Rod said is true to that. Who you work with and how you work together, whether it's in a broadcast booth or at church or whatever, is just so important. But Rod was a terrific He was so prepped. He was so prepared for the job that he was doing. He didn't get fooled. You know, there weren't a lot of things that came up that he wasn't ready for that situation. And a great example are the two calls from 2013. Listen, you don't practice the miracle at Jordan Hare and kick six. You can't practice that.
Yeah.
You just have to be ready for those kind of calls. And to do that in a 2-week span against the two biggest rivals in the two biggest games of that year to that point, and to nail both of those calls is remarkable. And he did it to a T, and they are calls that will go down in Auburn history as long as there is Auburn.
Yes.
More than Auburn history, just
Sure.
college football history.
Absolutely. The kick six has got to be one of the top calls ever. Period. End of sentence.
Well, you talk about family, the Auburn family. You talk about the family church, those rallying around you. Andy, talk about Dr. Jan and how she has obviously the rock of your family. And
No
we want
question.
people to get to know you personally. And so if you wouldn't mind, maybe speak to how she has held you up during these times.
Jan grew up in Opp, Alabama, home of the Rattlesnake Rodeo. Her father and mother both grew up in that area. Her father was a physician, longtime physician in that area. And Jan has been in education since she came to Auburn. She came to Auburn and graduated with her bachelor's degree in childhood education, and then went to UAB for a master's, has taught kindergarten in the Eufaula area, and then decided she had an opportunity to come back to Auburn and work on her PhD. And got her PhD at Auburn, and then from that point has worked in college education ever since at Troy Dothan. And then after we met and got married, she has been at Columbus State. She's now the associate dean for the College of Education and Health Performance at Columbus State. And listen, as close as friends as I was with Rod and with Paula, and I've known them for a long, long time, if not for Jan, they don't ask me alone to be Joshua's guardian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was a team. It was Jan and I. And after Rod and Paula passed away, this past summer is in some regards is a blur. And Jan took the lead on a lot of we still had some legal issues. They had not signed the will at the time after they had asked us to be the guardians. They had intended on doing that and hadn't got around to it when the accident occurred. So Jan took the lead on a lot of the legal, making sure that we had all of our ducks in a row. And we were kind of learning as the summer went along. And then Joshua comes to live with us in July and has been with us ever since. And we're still dealing with some legal things with regard to the estate. Nothing bad or anything, but the lawyers and the accountants that deal with this have remarked at how incredibly organized Jan has been through all of this. So that kind of gives you an idea. But we met back in 2003, got married in 2004. We have both lost family members since then, and I can't imagine going through life, let alone what this last year has been like, without her by my side and in many times in leading the way in our lives. She has been a great rock. That's a great way to put it.
That's awesome.
Well, Mandy, I see what's in it for you, but what does she get out of that relationship?
Well, she's been an Auburn fan for, well, let me put it this way. She grew up as an Alabama fan. Her father was an Alabama grad, went to UAB, what is now UAB Medical School. And she grew up an Alabama fan, although her mother had gone and graduated from Auburn. And then Jan kind of changed and came to Auburn. But that family had season tickets at Auburn back to the 70s.
Wow.
So Jan was an Auburn fan before she ever knew who I was. And so she goes to as many of the games, football, basketball, baseball. We go to gymnastics together, softball, as many things as we can get out. and she is as much of an Auburn fan as I am. So from time to time, we'll make some trips together. We were in Brooklyn for the basketball tournament at the Barclays Center. So she made that trip with me. So we get to spend some time on some of these trips together. But listen, she's an Auburn fan, and it gets her a little bit closer to the action, so to speak.
You use your skill set, sir. Absolutely. And Jeff is dying to start talking a little college football, but I'm going to hold him off just for a second. Debate in these parts all the time. And talk to us about Auburn family and the campus and why that is truly the friendliest campus in the South.
Here's the thing, and listen, I'm not naive to think that this doesn't exist in Tuscaloosa or Starkville or Oxford or wherever, okay? And I'm not an Auburn graduate. I graduated from Indiana State, although I've worked around and for this university now for almost, it'll be 32 years in August. And I don't know how many people that I've interviewed in the past that either grew up in Auburn, went to Auburn University, and perhaps went away for their career and then came back to Auburn, whether it was a career move, whether it was to be close to family, whether it was just to come and retire in Auburn. I've never seen a community that brings its people back more than Auburn does. And listen, it's a lovely area to live in. There's golf and fine arts, and you're an hour and a half from Atlanta and an hour from Montgomery. It's a great place. But, you hear about whatever, fill in the blank school nation behind it, all right? Whether it's, for example, the Penn State nation or whatever. You don't hear that about Auburn very much. You hear Auburn family.
Yes.
Coach Dye talks about that quite a bit. And there's a man that grew up Georgia, played at Georgia, outstanding player, coached at Alabama and Wyoming and East Carolina. He comes to Auburn and he's never left. Even when his time at Auburn was over, he is still in this area. Hal Baird is another one. Hal was the legendary baseball coach at Auburn, was from Virginia originally. And when his days were done, he stayed in Auburn. Sonny Smith is another example. A man that coached all over, was great at Auburn as a coach. Moved away, was in Birmingham for a while, but moved back to Auburn. He wanted to be closer to his daughter and his granddaughter, his grandkids. And there's another one. You look at some of these pro baseball players, Gabe Gross, Tim Hudson, Greg Olson, Scott Sullivan, all of those guys played Major League Baseball. They probably made enough money where they could have lived anywhere in the world, but they live in Auburn. There's a man named Walt Woltos that has contributed millions of dollars to Auburn, has an engineering degree from Auburn, went away and helped develop some of the technology for ALS patients that helps them communicate. And this is a man, certainly from a financial standpoint, that could live anywhere in the world and do so comfortably. But he and his wife have moved back to Auburn. And there are so many more of those examples out there for folks that probably are not as well known as some of the folks that I've talked about. But those are just a couple of examples of folks that have come to live back in Auburn, whether it was their home growing up, whether it was it's their alma mater. There's one man, as a matter of fact, that I interviewed when I was doing my morning show, that he and his wife were both former Secret Service agents, worked for presidents, worked for President Clinton, worked for President Bush. Their son came to Auburn to swim in a camp. They came down with their son for a swimming camp and said, when we're done with our careers, this is where we're coming, and that's exactly what's happened. They moved to Auburn, and they had no connection to Auburn other than their son had come to a swimming camp, but this is where they live now. So there's some examples for you.
Before I let Jeff get enthralled in college football, I'm trying to hold him back. You can just feel the tension here.
I can.
Personally, I love when I get to talk to play-by-play people like yourself. Who are some of the play-by-play guys? You've mentioned a few in the past. Who are some of the current play-by-play guys across the country that you think they do a tremendous job? I like what they do.
Well, let me tell you one guy that I think is terrific, and I think will continue to rise is Tom Hart, that you see on the SEC network, you see him on ESPN, and he can do anything. Tom can do any sport and does it seamlessly. I grew up listening to Jack Buck. Jack Buck was my hero growing up, not only just as a play-by-play man, and he was extraordinary doing that, but he was a radio man in St. Louis. And along with Stan Musial, there's also a statue of Jack Buck at Busch Stadium to show you how important that man was to Cardinal fans. A man that I worked with in Carbondale by the name of Mike Reese. He was my boss. He has been the play-by-play man at SIU Carbondale for over 40 years.
Incredible.
And is just from a technical standpoint, is as good as there is as a play-by-play man, and an outstanding writer, driven to this very day. But listen, there are some great play-by-play guys in the Southeastern Conference, and so many different styles. You know, you have the new young guns out there. You have the old guard. You know, I mean, listen, the play-by-play guys like John Ward at Tennessee and Jim Fife at Auburn, and Jim Hawthorne down at LSU. And then there's some guys that are kind of bridging that gap from there. David Kellum at Ole Miss has been there for 40-some years. Jim Ellis, who continues to do Mississippi State baseball, has been doing that for 40-some years. And then you've got the young guys in the league now, that the Chris Blairs of the world down at LSU now, that are making their mark. And we're all different, but those are some of the broadcasters. Jack Buck's the one that, for me though, he's the one that had more influence as a child. Mike Reese from a professional standpoint, because I worked with Mike for 4 years. Mike Kelly, who is the play-by-play voice at Missouri, is in the Missouri Broadcasting Hall of Fame. Mike and I worked together under Mike Reese in Carbondale.
Oh, wow.
It's fun to listen to the different styles out there, and there are some vastly different styles out there. But one thing that they have is a love for the university that they're working for, and a love for the job that they have, including me.
I'm gonna clip the string here. Go ahead. Let's talk a little Auburn football.
Well, I was just thinking on the 17th of October, you got A&M coming back, and hopefully that's another W for Auburn, and they work hard. But the game that I want you to talk about is the game of redemption. I think that is going to happen on the 21st of November against LSU. I mean, Auburn was last year by 3 points. And
right.
So what are we looking at right there? How big of a game is that for them to come to the Plains and speak to that? I know there's some passion there.
It will be different because it will be so late in the season.
Yeah.
Typically, that LSU game has been one of the first conference games, and with the moving Georgia earlier in the year now, that LSU game is kind of the lead into the Iron Bowl now. So it doesn't get a whole lot easier for Auburn in that sense. No one played LSU any better than Auburn did a year ago.
That's right.
And it was in Baton Rouge. No one played them better. No one controlled that offense, if you can use the word controlled in that offense, any better than Auburn did. Now, a lot of those guys are gone. Jeremiah Denson, Javaris Davis, Daniel Thomas, Derek Brown, Marlon Davidson, all of those are gone. They're all about to sign contracts in the NFL. They've all been drafted or they've signed free agent contracts. So you've lost a lot on that defense. But LSU's lost a whole lot too, hasn't it? Joe Burrow is gone. Hilaire, the tailback, is gone. Randy Moss's son at tight end is gone. They've lost the Jefferson at wide receiver is gone. So both of these teams will have new looks, but what interests me about that is by that time when they roll into town in November, we'll know about both of these teams. I don't think we always knew about both of these teams when this game was a late September or maybe an early October game. We'll know a lot more about these teams when it becomes a November game. It will be a big game. It always is. It has become that now for Auburn, that Auburn LSU game. It perhaps has replaced Tennessee on the schedule as far as one of those games that you circle if you're an Auburn fan, I think. Because, when it was Auburn, Tennessee, LSU wasn't on the schedule every year. back in the day. Now it is, and it will be a big one in November.
Awesome.
Well, I want to talk about it doesn't get any easier. Why in the world are these coaches choosing to take jobs in the SEC, especially that side of the division? When you talk about getting tougher, oh my gosh, we get the Pirates himself,
right?
At Mississippi State, right?
You know what though? These guys are competitors,
no doubt,
and competitors want to compete at the highest level. And the Southeastern Conference in football, and specifically the SEC West in football, is as good as it gets. And Lane Kiffin's had a sniff of what it's like when he was at Tennessee and then at Alabama before he went to Florida or Florida Atlantic and is now back. So he knows. Mike Leach, it'll be interesting to see because he's never been. I mean, he was at Texas Tech. That's a good league. It's not known for its defense. He was at Washington State, probably a little bit better defensively. He's an offensive guy, and now he comes to the SEC West where defense is the king. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see. But I think both of those were great hires for Ole Miss and for Mississippi State. It has invigorated the fan base. It has helped in recruiting. And those two guys, I think, will be successful. It's made it tougher on the rest of the SEC West for those guys coming in as well. But I think, listen, they're competitors. They want to compete at the highest level. You see it all the time. Some would go, why in the world would you want to coach in the SEC West? Well, if you're successful in the SEC West, think about that. What does that say about you at that point?
That's a legacy move, with Coach Leach being this offensive mastermind. If he can be successful in the defenses in the SEC, I think that solidifies him as a coach.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see. And listen, State has always been a good defensive team, and State has always been a physical offensive team. How do they make that transformation into his style of offense? Does he bring that pirate gunslinger mentality to Mississippi State? Can he install that at Mississippi State? That'll be one really interesting question. And how long does it take for him to do that at Mississippi State? Because wherever he's been, you're right. But wherever he's been, he's always been known for offense. Will that be the case? And how quickly will it take? How quickly will it take to do that at Mississippi State?
Andy, what are your? Everybody's talking this position, but in your top three, what are the guys that are going to stand out this year for Auburn?
Well, Bo Nix needs to take a step forward. Listen, he had a fantastic freshman season, perhaps the best freshman quarterback that Auburn has ever had. Now, we might have said that about Pat Sullivan had he been able to be a freshman, had he been able to play varsity ball as a freshman. But Bo Nix had an outstanding freshman season. But he's got to take another step in his sophomore year. And I think having Chad Morris as his offensive coordinator and as his quarterback coach will help him in that regard. He's got to take a step forward. We've got to see guys, and here's another one I think that has to take a step forward, and perhaps as much in a leadership role as anything else, is Nick Brahms at center. Because, guys, he's about it as far as the starters coming back for Auburn. Yeah. Now, you hear Broderius Ham, and we all expect him to he's going to be stepping into a role and being a very good player for Auburn. But Nick Brahms is the returning starter for the Tigers. Here's another guy that I don't know if he has to take a step forward, but has to continue to be that stud in the middle of the defense is KJ Britt at linebacker. And listen, he was an all-SEC performer a year ago. And when we went into last season, we knew the defensive line was going to be outstanding, and that secondary was loaded with veterans. It was those linebackers. We knew there was talent there, but no one had really stepped up to that. Well, KJ Britt filled that leadership void at linebacker, and now he comes back for his senior season. He's a guy, I think, that is kind of the glue to the defense, at least going into the season. And one of the big questions, guys, is how does Auburn replace Aaron Sippos at punter? Aaron Sippos was a weapon for Auburn as a punter. He's now gone, and he signed a free agent contract with the Detroit Lions. So who steps into the punting role for Auburn? You've seen games. You see it in the high school game where a field position can be an enormous factor in a ball game. And you need that kind of punter that can pin a team deep. Auburn's got to find that before this season starts.
We want to talk about Patrick for a second, and then Bo, of course. Being from this area, Patrick playing at Etowah High School here and getting to see him coach at Scottsboro. Then the transition he made to Pinson Valley, won a couple state championships, now moved down closer to you down there to be able to really spend more time with Bo. What do you think that's going to have? What kind of influence that's going to have, not from a coaching standpoint, but just being a dad in Bo's life?
Well, it probably helps the mom, too, because she's, Krista, his wife, and Bo's mom is, 25 minutes away from Auburn now.
Yeah.
And I think it helps. And we talk about someone, moving into a high-powered job. Well, that job at Central Phoenix City, they've been in the state championship game, the 7A state championship, the last 2 years, and they won it 2 years ago. So he moves into a high-pressure role, much like Mike Leach at State and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. So, and I'm not surprised at that by Patrick. He's a terrific coach. He was a wonderful football player at Auburn. Now, he will tell you, Bo will probably tell you quicker that Bo is the better athlete than the dad, has the better arm, and he's probably right about that. But, Patrick's a coach, and I would imagine there are times where Patrick just has to sit back and let the Auburn coaches coach his son. But I'm sure there are also times where Bo goes to his dad and, looks for advice, because not only was Patrick a former Auburn football player and a high level coach, but he's also dad. And you need that, don't you?
And you talk about a coaching legacy. Yeah, Patrick experienced this playing for his dad, Conrad. And Conrad went in those state championships at Warner Robins High School in Georgia, and having his brother Rusty there as well. So it is a family legacy indeed.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. And Bo is carrying that on.
And I hear he may not even be the best athlete in the family.
Well, there's another quarterback coming up, isn't there? So
yes, sir.
We'll just have to see.
Well, you've been so gracious with your time. Before you get out of here, though, one of my favorite Auburn people of all time, Brad Law. What great Brad Law stories can you tell us?
Oh, there are so many that I can't tell you. Let me put it that way.
Yes, sir.
Brad's father, BT, played at Auburn. His father is in the Hall of Fame in that area, the Piedmont area. Brad came to Auburn and started working for us as a part-timer, and has now worked into where he is our producer for all of our broadcasts, and is the locker room host for football. He is our producer and our studio host for men's basketball. And one of the great regrets that I have this season is that 18 games into the baseball season, it was cut short, but this was going to be our first year to do baseball together, and to make those road trips and start to form that friendship that you have when you're going around the Southeastern Conference. But Brad and I worked together for a long, long time. He is incredibly talented. He is a humble individual, and he's one of those teammates that you love to have working with you. And I'm fortunate that a Brad Law works alongside with me and with all our folks at the Auburn Sports Network. Now, that's the good things I can tell you. I'll have to tell you some of the other things off the air.
Yes. Any closing thoughts to the Auburn family here that's watching this?
Well, it's been interesting to watch the Auburn student athletes reach out to the Auburn family. In the years that I've done this, I don't, for an athlete, I'm not sure that they really understand how important that Auburn family is until they move on from their playing days, whether it's to the pro ranks or whether they're moving into their careers. And then they understand how important those fans and those friends and those teammates and those coaches were to them. So it's been interesting to see that transformation. I don't know when all of this is going to end. I pray that it ends soon and safely, obviously. Like every fan base out there, the Auburn family can't wait for the time when we're at Jordan-Hare Stadium for that opener and getting ready for the soccer season opener and cross country and that type of thing. Perhaps more so this year than in any year ever. This is such a unique situation that we're going through. And it's been interesting and I've talked to a couple for podcasts that we're doing at auburntigers.com, former student athletes that are now working on the front line. Whether it's in the nursing field or as a doctor, medical doctor, those that are working on the front line that are cleaning and that type of thing. It's been interesting to see the reaction to those student athletes that have moved on and are doing that now. So, guys, when this is going to end, I don't know. We're safe and well here. I can't wait for a time when we're all back together, and I can't wait for a time when we're all back together at Jordan-Hare Stadium and getting ready for that first Auburn football game.
So, Andy, thank you so much for being so kind and gracious, and our prayers are with you and the Auburn family and Jan, and we pray this gets over quick so we can hear your voice and see your face back on television again. We're excited, and thank you so much for being so generous with us.
Guys, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for all that you do for Auburn. I hope that you stay well, stay safe, and maybe the next time that we talk with each other, we can do it face-to-face. War Eagle.
That's great.
Hey,
thank you.
Big War Eagle to you. Thanks for being a part of Kapow Sports today.
My pleasure.
That is the voice of the Auburn Tigers, Andy Burcham. Jeff, he was talking about teammates, man. I couldn't have a better one myself.
Well, I was wondering if I needed to change his teammates. Surround yourself with good folks.
You're going to upgrade with him, there's no doubt.
Andy, thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure, guys. Have a great day.
Yes.